The house was quiet, almost too quiet. Lily's eyes flickered open first, just as the clock struck midnight. She thought she heard something. A sound. Soft, deliberate. She sat up, listening. Ruth, her twin, stirred beside her. "What is it?" Ruth's voice was barely a whisper. Lily leaned over, pressing her ear to the window. The dark, thick silence outside was broken by a faint rustling, the kind of noise that made your blood run cold. "Someone's out there," Lily said. She glanced over at Ruth. Her sister was sitting up now, too, eyes wide, frozen. The window was cracked open, the faint smell of damp earth creeping through. Lily looked at the shadow standing by the window. It was Clara, their stepmother, her silhouette almost ghostly against the moonlight. She was on the phone. She wasn't supposed to be awake. "Clara?" Ruth's voice trembled. Lily silenced her with a hand. They listened. Yeah. I'll bring them." Clara's voice was low, a murmur that barely carried across the room. She was speaking to someone else, someone on the other end of the line. Lily's heart thudded. "Bring them where?" Clara continued. "I'll get Em out by tomorrow night. No one will know. The deal's done." A cold chill wrapped itself around the girls. Ruth's hand clutched Lily's arm, tight. What is she talking about? Lily didn't know. But the sound of Clara's words, the tone, something wasn't right. "I don't care what you have to do. Just make sure the rest is handled. I've already taken care of the payment. Tomorrow." The door creaked open a little wider. Clara shifted, stepping away from the window, and the conversation faded into the distance. Ruth was trembling now, her grip on Lily's arm tightening. "She's going to do something to us, isn't she?" Lily's chest felt tight. Her voice barely came out. "I think she is." The night had never felt so heavy, so suffocating. The pieces were there, but they didn't fit. Clara, their stepmother, had always been cold. But this? This was different. Lily's gaze locked with Ruth's. The trust that had always been between them started to slip away, replaced by something darker. Something that didn't belong in their world. The room was silent, save for the steady beat of their hearts. Lily and Ruth stayed up for hours after the phone call ended. They didn't sleep, didn't move, not even to check the door, to make sure Clara wasn't coming back to get them. The quiet of the room suffocated them, the darkness turning into something they couldn't ignore. It was the weight of knowledge, of understanding that something had shifted, that they were no longer safe in their own home. The silence stretched between them. Ruth was the first to break it. "What did she mean, the deal's done?" she asked, her voice too sharp in the stillness. Lily didn't answer right away. She was staring at the moonlight slanting across the floor. "She's planning to sell us," Lily said, her voice raw. Ruth's face twisted. "To who?" Lily swallowed hard. "I don't know." "I don't know, but it doesn't matter. It's happening." The weight of it sank in, each word like an anchor. Clara, their mother's replacement, had betrayed them in a way that went beyond the petty cruelty of daily life. This was worse. This was a choice to make them into something disposable. Ruth's mind raced. How can she? She can't. We're her. Ruth stopped. We're nothing to her. The words hung there, bitter and cold. Lily turned her head. We can't just wait for it to happen. We have to do something. They were silent for a moment. Neither of them had a plan, a way out. The fear and the anger tangled inside them, too thick to see through. Clara had always been distant, cold. But this was something darker. I don't think she's doing this for money, Lily said, after a long pause. Ruth frowned. What do you mean? Lily's voice was quieter now, softer. I think there's something bigger behind this. I think there's something she's been planning for years. Ruth's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? You think she's been planning to sell us all along? I don't know. Lily shook her head, feeling helpless. But whatever it is, we're caught in the middle of it. The girls exchanged a look, one that spoke of growing realization. It wasn't just their lives that were at risk anymore. It was their place in the world, their very identity, and they were at the mercy of someone who had never once shown them kindness. Ruth's voice was low, her words tight. She's going to take us, Lily. And we won't even know where we'll end up. Lily didn't have an answer. She couldn't promise they would escape. But the anger bubbling inside her was enough to fight for. They were not powerless. Not yet. Clara's plan was set, but the girls weren't going to wait for it to unfold. The power had shifted. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about taking back control, about claiming the one thing they still had, their names. They weren't ready for what came next. But they were ready to make sure Clara couldn't take everything from them. In the morning, Clara was waiting. She was already dressed, her hair pinned back, her eyes distant. She was the picture of control. The twins were nothing more than an inconvenience to her. "Are you girls ready?" she asked, her voice too sweet to be sincere. Lily couldn't bring herself to answer, not yet. Ruth stepped forward, her voice steady. "We overheard you." Clara's face didn't change. "What are you talking about?" Her voice was still sugar-coated, still too calm. Ruth pressed on. "You're going to sell us." "We heard the whole conversation." Clara's smile faltered for a split second, just enough for Ruth to notice. But she recovered quickly. "I don't know what you think you heard, but you're mistaken." Lily felt her stomach turn. "You're lying." Clara's expression hardened. "You girls have no idea what you're talking about. Don't make things worse." But it wasn't Clara's tone that worried the twins. It was the coldness in her eyes. The lie wasn't even the point. It was what was behind it. There was something in Clara's past, something older than the twins' understanding, that the stepmother was hiding. Ruth didn't back down. "We know what you're planning. And we're not going anywhere." Clara's lips curled into something close to a sneer. "You have no choice." The words were sharp, final. But for the first time, the twins realized Clara was no longer the one in control. They saw it in the tightness of her jaw, the way her hands clenched into fists. The cracks in her mask were widening. And the twins were getting closer to understanding what she'd been hiding. The silence hung between them, thick and heavy. Ruth's eyes locked. On Clara, and for a moment, everything was still. It was the calm before the storm. Lily's breath caught in her throat. The tension felt like it could snap at any second. The world felt smaller, suffocating, as if the house was closing in on them, watching. Waiting. Clara turned her back to the twins and started walking toward the door. "Don't be foolish. You'll regret this." But they didn't move. They stood there, watching her leave, the weight of their own uncertainty pulling them down. For the first time, the twins understood that Clara wasn't just trying to sell them. She was trying to erase them. And that, more than anything else, was what they couldn't let happen. They weren't children anymore. They had a plan, even if they didn't know what it was yet. But they were about to find out just how far they would go to stop her. That night, the house felt different. The air was thicker now, as if the walls had taken a breath, holding it in for just a moment longer than it should. The twins sat on the edge of their beds, not speaking, not moving, but feeling everything at once. The weight of their discoveries, the truth about Clara, about their mother's death, about the land they all shared, hung over them like a storm that hadn't yet broken. Lily's fingers traced the edge of the old letter Ruth had found earlier, the one that had changed everything. Clara wasn't just a woman. She wasn't just a cruel stepmother. She was part of something ancient. And it was that something that had woven its tendrils into their family, pulling their strings long before the girls had even been born. Ruth's voice broke the silence, low and steady. "I think we're just starting to understand what she really wants from us." Lily didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked down at the letter again, her mind replaying the words, the signatures. It was like looking into a mirror that hadn't reflected the truth for years. Her family's name, her mother's name, it didn't mean what she thought it did. And Clara's family, the one tied to the land, had always been there, in the shadows, pulling the strings. She's been planning this all along, Lily said, her voice barely a whisper. We were never meant to have a chance. Ruth turned to face her twin, her eyes dark with something close to rage. We've always been pawns, Lily. But we don't have to be anymore. Lily nodded slowly. Ruth's words hit something deep inside her. The truth was painful, but it wasn't the end. Not yet. They were still alive, still breathing. And they had each other. That was the only thing that mattered now. Lily stood, her legs stiff from sitting so long. She walked to the window, staring out at the night. The stars above seemed distant, cold. But there was something in her, something that had awakened with the weight of their discoveries. I think we need to say it, Lily said, her voice cutting through the stillness like a blade. Ruth looked at her, confused. Say what? Our names, Lily said. We haven't said them in years. Not out loud. But we need to now. We need to remind ourselves who we are. Ruth didn't speak at first. She just looked at her sister, eyes searching. Then, without warning, she stood and crossed the room to join her. Lily turned to face her, taking a breath. Say it, she said again. Ruth stared at her, searching her face for some sign of hesitation, some last shred of doubt. But Lily's eyes were steady. They had already made up their minds. Ruth swallowed hard, then spoke. Ruth. Hawthorne. Lily's heart raced, a sudden wave of something unfamiliar rushing through her. Lily. Hawthorne. The words were like fire, cutting through the silence in the room. It was a name. It was just a name. But for the first time in years, it felt like power. They both stood still for a moment, as if the act of speaking it aloud had changed something inside them. Something had shifted, something inside them both that they hadn't known was broken. The walls that had once kept them hidden, kept them small, seemed less sturdy now. They were no longer trapped in the silence of their mother's absence, or in the shadow of Clara's cold rule. They were something else. I feel different, Ruth said, her voice shaking. Like it's all starting to make sense now. Lily didn't answer, her own emotions swirling. She couldn't explain it, couldn't put it into words. But it was like a door had opened, and beyond it was something far more dangerous, far more powerful than anything they had ever imagined. We've been living with this curse, Lily said quietly, her eyes fixed on the dark horizon. But now we get to decide what happens next. Ruth nodded, her lips pressed into a tight line. We can't let Clara win. The air in the room seemed to shift then, a new kind of tension filling it. Not the kind that had suffocated them before, not the kind that had held them down in their own house, but something different. Something like a spark, waiting for the right moment to ignite. Tomorrow, Lily said, her voice sharp, steady. We do something. Ruth didn't need to ask what. She didn't need to hear the words. They both knew. They had already decided. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It wasn't just about being pawns in Clara's game. It was about taking back what was theirs. It was about taking control of their own fate, of their names. I don't care what she says, Ruth whispered, her voice low, but firm. I'm not going down without a fight. Lily turned to her twin, the weight of everything they'd learned, everything they'd uncovered, settling in. She didn't have to say it out loud. Ruth felt it too. They were no longer the scared girls in the corner of the house. They weren't powerless. They were something else. And Clara was going to find that out soon enough. As they stood together in the dark, their names echoing in their minds, the world outside the window seemed less daunting. They weren't children anymore. And they weren't going to let anyone take what was rightfully theirs. Tomorrow, the game would change. Clara had set the stage. She had made the arrangements in secret, the kind of careful planning that didn't leave room for mistakes. The twins knew it was happening. The weight of it pressed down on them, the knowledge that they were about to become commodities, sold like cattle to the highest bidder. But Clara didn't know what they had discovered, what they had become. She didn't know that the game had changed. The day was dull and heavy, the kind of heat that made everything feel sluggish, like the world was dragging its feet. The twins could hear Clara's movements downstairs, the low murmur of her voice as she made final preparations. They stayed in their room, pretending to be invisible, pretending to be obedient, but they weren't. Not anymore. Lily looked at Ruth, her eyes steady. "It's time." Ruth nodded, her jaw set. They hadn't spoken much today, but the silence between them was full of meaning. They had decided what needed to be done. And no matter how scared they felt, they weren't going to back down now. They could hear Clara's voice getting louder as she moved through the house. The final steps of her plan were unfolding, and the twins were running out of time. Lily stood up, walking over to the window. From here, she could see the long, winding dirt road leading to the house. It was quiet, too quiet, like the calm before a storm. And she knew whatever was coming next, it wasn't just the auction. It was something far worse. Ruth stepped up beside her, her eyes scanning the horizon. "Do you think she really has control of everything?" Lily didn't look at her sister. "She didn't need to. She thinks she does." They stood like that for a long time, side by side, until Clara's footsteps grew louder, approaching the stairs. The twins both turned to face the door. When Clara entered, she was every bit the picture of cold, practiced composure. There was no sign of hesitation, no sign of guilt. She was ready. "Get up," she ordered, her tone sharp and final. Lily and Ruth didn't move. Clara's eyes flicked to them, her gaze narrowing. "Now," she said, her voice thick with command. "It's time. You don't want to keep the buyers waiting." Ruth stood first, her back straight. Lily followed. They walked toward the door, but not before Ruth glanced back at Clara, her eyes burning with something like defiance. "You're not going to get away with this," Ruth said, her voice steady, though it wavered just slightly. Clara smiled, a thin, empty curve of her lips. "I already have." The house was suffocating, the walls pressing in on them as they walked down the hallway, their footsteps echoing like a drumbeat. They moved as if they had no choice, like they were already lost in the game. But neither of them felt lost anymore. They knew what they had to do. They just had to make it to the end. The driveway stretched out before them, dusty and sun-bleached. A wagon was parked at the end of it, waiting. The man standing beside it looked like he belonged to this place. Rough hands, a weathered face, the kind of man who wouldn't hesitate to take what he was given. His eyes flicked over them as they approached, but he didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Clara moved ahead, her steps quick and purposeful. The twins followed, but they weren't walking behind her anymore. They were walking toward their future, toward something that felt like a reckoning. The man's gaze lingered on them for a moment too long, and Lily felt a shiver run down her spine. This wasn't the first time he'd been here, and it wouldn't be the last. But it was the first time they had looked him in the eye without fear. "Ready?" Clara asked, her voice so smooth, so practiced. Ruth didn't respond right away, but Lily could see the way her sister's hand curled into a fist at her side. They were ready. Lily turned to the man, her eyes steady. "We're not just here to be sold." The man looked at her, then Ruth, his eyes hardening. "I'm not here to argue." Clara turned to face them then, her expression hardening. "What's done is done. There's no turning back." Lily stepped forward. "We don't need you anymore," she said, her voice stronger than she thought it would be. "You're not in control anymore." Clara's eyes flashed with something dark, something furious. But the man beside her didn't react. He just stood there, waiting. "Don't be foolish," Clara warned. "You think you have power? You think you've changed something?" Lily didn't flinch. "We have." There was a long silence, and then Clara's expression cracked for the briefest moment. The mask, so perfectly placed, faltered. She turned away, walking toward the wagon without another word. The man hesitated, then nodded. He walked over to the wagon and lifted the tarp covering the back. It was empty, save for a few old crates. He gestured for them to climb in. Ruth hesitated, but Lily was already moving. She climbed into the wagon first, her heart pounding, and Ruth followed. The wagon creaked under their weight, and the dust rose in the air as the wheels began to turn. Clara didn't look at them as they left. Her eyes were fixed ahead, and her face was unreadable. But Lily knew. They hadn't won. Not yet. But they were no longer her victims. As the wagon rattled down the road, the house faded from view. The twins didn't speak. They didn't need to. They had crossed a line. A line that couldn't be uncrossed. This was the beginning. It was a dangerous game now, but they were playing it on their terms. The air inside the wagon was stifling, thick with dust and the lingering scent of leather and sweat. Ruth sat with her knees pulled to her chest, her eyes darting to the man who drove, his back rigid, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. He was silent, as if he knew his part in the world was nothing more than a transaction. And that was all. Lily sat beside Ruth, her mind racing. The wagon moved slowly, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to shift, for something to change. The house, their past, Clara, it all seemed to drift farther away with each passing moment. But the truth was, nothing had really changed yet. Not in the way that mattered. Lily felt a tightness in her chest. They were no longer children, no longer pawns in a game they couldn't see. But the man beside them, the one who held their fate in his calloused hands, had no idea what was coming. The road was long, and with each mile, the twins were left with nothing but their thoughts and the weight of their decision. But this wasn't just about escape. It wasn't just about getting away from Clara, from the auction, from the life they had been handed. This was about control. The man flicked the reins, urging the horses to pick up the pace. He didn't glance at them, didn't say a word. Lily noticed his silence now, how it contrasted with the tension between her and Ruth. The silence between them felt heavy, like it was carrying 1,000 unsaid things. Ruth finally broke it. "I'm not going to let her do this to us, Lily. I don't care how much she tries to make it seem like she's in charge. I won't let her win." Lily turned to her, the weight of her sister's words settling in. "We already took the first step. This is only the beginning." Ruth's eyes were dark with determination. "We'll make sure it's the last." Lily's eyes met Ruth's, and for the first time since they'd left the house, she felt a spark of something other than survival, something that felt like a plan, like a way out. "We go back." Ruth blinked, surprise flickering across her face. "Go back? You're crazy." "We have to," Lily said, her voice steady. "We need to take everything back from her, Ruth. We can't run anymore. It's time to make her pay." Ruth didn't respond immediately. She stepped back, her eyes searching Lily's face, reading her, understanding her in a way that no one else ever could. "Are you sure about this?" Ruth asked quietly. Lily nodded. "I am." For the first time since they had left, the weight that had been hanging over them lifted, just a little. They had made the decision. They were done being chased. They were going to face Clara, face everything they had been running from. The next morning, they didn't waste any time. They packed quickly, gathering only what they needed, no more running, no more hiding. They had made up their minds. They left the inn with nothing but the quiet certainty that the final act of this game was about to begin. As they walked back through the town, past the same faces that hadn't noticed them before, Lily felt a calm settle over her. The storm was coming, but she wasn't afraid anymore. This was the reckoning. And they were going to make sure Clara understood exactly what it meant. When they reached the edge of town, they paused for a moment. The road ahead stretched out, and Lily knew they couldn't turn back now. They weren't just going to face Clara, they were going to take back what had always been theirs. "We do this together," Ruth said, her voice firm. Lily nodded, a small smile pulling at the corners of her mouth. "We do this together." Lily and Ruth lay in their small room, the air thick with the silence of the night. The faint hum of the wind against the walls outside barely reached them, and the house seemed to breathe with an unsettling stillness. Ruth shifted in the bed, pulling the worn blanket tighter around her. Lily, her eyes wide open, stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of something she couldn't quite place. She turned her head slowly to Ruth, but her sister was already looking back at her. Ruth's brow furrowed. "Can't sleep either?" Lily whispered. Ruth didn't respond immediately, her eyes narrowing as if listening to something just beyond the range of sound. The creak of the floorboards below echoed through the house, distant but distinct. It was the sound of someone moving in the dark, the kind of sound that rips through the quiet like a sudden gust of wind. Lily's breath caught. It wasn't usual for Clara to be up at this hour. She wasn't the type to wander in the night unless there was something to hide. "Lily," Ruth whispered, her voice barely audible, as though afraid the night itself would listen in. "Do you hear that?" Lily nodded, her heart beginning to race. A shadow passed by the thin light creeping in through the window. The figure was tall, silhouetted against the pale light of the moon. Clara! The twins could see her through the gap in the curtain, her back to them, her movements slow, deliberate. She was at the window. "Who's she talking to?" Ruth's voice trembled. The sound of Clara's voice reached them faintly. It was low, smooth, too smooth. She was speaking in a hushed tone, her words barely comprehensible, but the twins strained to listen, their hearts pounding in their chests. "Is she selling us?" Ruth whispered, barely daring to speak the thought aloud. Lily held her breath. "I don't know. I think she's planning something. Something bad." They both stayed frozen, their eyes locked on Clara's form, unable to move, unwilling to blink. A chill ran through them both as they tried to make sense of what they were hearing. Clara's voice was sharp and urgent, cutting through the thin walls like a blade. It was impossible to make out all the words, but the tone, there was something desperate in it. Something far worse than what they had imagined. Lily clenched her fists. "She can't be," her voice trailed off, but Ruth already knew. Clara wasn't just planning to take them to the market, or some party, like she said. It was something darker. Something far worse. Ruth's face paled. "We need to do something." Lily shook her head, her voice low but certain. "We don't know enough yet." The shadows outside shifted, and Clara's voice grew louder, more urgent, as if she were trying to convince someone of something. The girls couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but the way Clara's words twisted the air made the room feel suffocating. The girls exchanged another look, their bodies rigid with tension. Clara wasn't negotiating over a simple trip. She was making plans that didn't just threaten their lives, they threatened everything they knew. Their trust in the world around them began to unravel with each passing second. They weren't just afraid anymore. They were beginning to understand, slowly, that their lives weren't their own. Clara's presence in the house had always been a shadow, something distant and cold, but now it felt oppressive. The wind outside picked up again, rattling the shutters. The house groaned, and the girls flinched at the sound. It felt like the house was listening too, holding its breath. "Did you hear that?" Ruth whispered, her voice trembling. The muffled sound of Clara's voice now seemed to carry through the walls, more distinct, as if she were speaking directly to them. It wasn't just about the girls. It wasn't just about money or some transaction. It was something deeper, something darker. The air around the twins grew colder, and the uncertainty in their hearts began to grow. Ruth's fingers gripped the blanket tighter, her knuckles white. "We can't stay here. Not anymore." Lily's eyes never left Clara's shadow. "We'll figure it out. We have to." But Ruth's voice cracked slightly as she said, "I don't think we have time." They sat there, still as statues, listening to the night and the voice of their stepmother twisting the darkness around them. Outside, the wind howled, and in the distance, the barn creaked. A moment passed, but it felt like hours. The house seemed to pulse with the weight of the secret that had just been revealed. The twins knew they couldn't go back to sleep. They couldn't pretend they hadn't heard what they had. The world they had known, the one where they were safe in their small, creaky house, was no longer a place they could trust. It was a trap. and it was closing in on them. When Clara finally stopped speaking, the silence that followed felt like the calm before the storm. The twins didn't move, didn't speak. They only waited, frozen in place. They heard the soft click of the door opening, and Clara's footsteps faded away. The house fell silent again. But for the twins, nothing would ever be the same. The room felt colder the moment Clara's footsteps faded into the distance. Lily and Ruth remained still, eyes wide, hearts pounding. The silence was heavy, suffocating, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. The house, once a place of comfort and routine, felt different now. They could feel it in the air, thick with the weight of the unknown. The world they knew was slipping away, replaced by something darker, something they couldn't yet fully grasp. Ruth was the first to speak, her voice barely a whisper. "Lily, do you think she was really planning to sell us?" Lily turned to look at her sister, her face pale. "I don't know," she murmured, her hands shaking slightly. "But I heard her. She wasn't talking about a trip or some market. She was negotiating. With someone." Ruth's eyes flicked to the door, as though Clara might return at any moment. "She never said who. Who would want us?" Lily swallowed, the thought lingering in the air like smoke. They'd always known Clara wasn't a loving stepmother. There had been coldness in her touch, distance in her gaze. But this was something else. "We don't know enough," Lily said quietly. "But it's bad. Really bad." Ruth stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor, the noise louder than it should have been. She began pacing, her footsteps sharp against the wooden floor. "We can't just sit here. We have to do something." Lily stood as well, her legs unsteady as she walked to the window, peering out into the night. The moon hung low in the sky, casting everything in a soft, eerie glow. The wind picked up again, stirring the trees in the distance, but the town was silent, as if holding its breath with them. "We don't know what's going on yet," Lily said, her voice firmer than before. "We don't even know who she was talking to. If we act too soon, we'll just make it worse." Ruth stopped pacing, her eyes hard. "Then what? We wait for her to finish what she started?" Lily didn't answer right away. She looked out the window again, the fear creeping up on her, settling in her chest. Everything they had trusted, every safe feeling in their home, was crumbling. But Ruth was right. They couldn't sit and wait. Clara wasn't the woman they'd once thought she was, and whatever plan she was setting in motion would destroy them if they didn't stop it. "I'll go to the barn," Lily said, her voice steady. "I'll check for signs, anything that gives us a clue about what she's planning." Ruth's eyes widened. "Alone?" She stepped forward, grabbing her sister's arm. "We don't know what she's involved in. What if—" "I'll be fine," Lily interrupted, pulling free from her sister's grasp. "We don't have time to argue. We need answers, Ruth. This isn't just about us anymore. She's making deals, and we have no idea who with." The resolve in Lily's voice silenced Ruth's objections. She bit her lip, but nodded. "All right. Just be careful." Lily gave a small nod and moved toward the door, her hand resting on the handle. Before she stepped out, she turned back to Ruth. "If something goes wrong, we stick together. No matter what." Ruth nodded. The words hung in the air like an unspoken promise, but the tension between them was undeniable. They were no longer children who could trust blindly. The world they lived in had changed, and they were starting to realize that the only way forward was through the dark, uncertain path ahead. The cold night air hit Lily like a punch in the stomach as she stepped outside. She could see her breath in the air, the faint mist swirling in the darkness. The barn stood in the distance, its shadow long in the moonlight. It was quiet, too quiet. The sounds of the wind were muffled by the thick silence of the night. The familiar scent of hay and wood seemed off somehow, heavier. Lily moved quickly, her boots crunching the gravel beneath her. Her heart pounded louder with every step, the fear creeping up her spine. What if Clara had already done something? What if they were too late? The thought made her stomach churn. But they had no choice. They had to know. As she reached the barn, she paused for a moment, listening. Nothing. Not even the creak of old wood. She reached for the door, hesitating. The barn door was slightly ajar, the wood groaning softly as she pushed it open. Inside, the smell of hay hit her immediately, mingling with the mustiness of the old structure. She took a step inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. There, in the far corner of the barn, was something she hadn't expected, a trunk. It was old, covered in dust, with leather straps and iron buckles. She had seen it before. It belonged to Clara, she was sure of it. Lily approached cautiously, her hand shaking slightly as she reached for the trunk. She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder to ensure no one was watching. No sound. No movement. When her fingers touched the leather, a loud creak echoed through the barn. Her heart skipped a beat. She froze, listening for any sign of Clara. But there was nothing. She knelt down, her fingers brushing over the rusted lock. There was a key, but it wasn't in sight. It had to be nearby. Without thinking, Lily began to move things aside, searching for the key. The rustling of hay and wooden crates filled the silence, but it felt like she was in a dream, a nightmare, where every movement was exaggerated, every sound louder than the last. And then, she found it, the key. It was tucked beneath a loose board, hidden away. She grabbed it, heart racing, and slid it into the lock. The trunk clicked open, revealing something wrapped in cloth. Lily's breath caught in her throat. The object inside wasn't just some old belongings. It was something far more dangerous. She stood frozen for a moment, the realization settling in this was not just about money. This was about power. And she wasn't sure she could stop it alone. The morning light crept slowly through the thin cracks in the wooden shutters, casting slats of pale sunlight across the floor. The air was still, but there was a tightness in it, a feeling that hadn't been there before. Lily sat on the edge of the bed, her mind racing through the events of the night. Ruth had barely slept, the two of them whispering in hushed tones about what they'd discovered. The trunk, the key, and the weight of what they might be facing, it was all too much to process, yet there was no time to waste. Clara was still their stepmother, and that meant she still held the reins of their lives, even if it felt like the power was shifting. Lily, Ruth said quietly from the doorway, her voice thin, betraying her nervousness. What now? Lily stood up, brushing the dust from her dress, her fingers lingering on the fabric. She could feel Ruth's gaze on her, the weight of the question hanging in the air between them. I don't know, she answered honestly, turning to face her sister. But we can't just sit here. If Clara's making deals like that, we need to confront her. We need to know the truth. Ruth nodded, though she wasn't sure how to feel about it. They'd been on the edge of something dangerous for as long as they could remember, but this was different. This wasn't just the quiet tension of an uncomfortable home, it was a deep, dark secret, and whatever Clara was planning was bigger than they could understand. Lily's eyes flickered toward the door, toward the world outside the room. We're not children anymore, she whispered. We can't wait for her to make the next move. We have to act. Ruth opened her mouth to argue but stopped, her lips pressing into a tight line. They both knew it wasn't about what they wanted anymore. The moment they'd overheard Clara the night before, it had all changed. There was no going back. With a quiet sigh, Ruth stood, her resolve solidifying. All right, she said softly. We'll do this together. The two girls moved toward the door, the weight of the air around them thick with something they couldn't name, fear, maybe, or something worse. As they stepped into the hallway, they both paused, listening. The house was silent, save for the creaks of the old wood under their feet. But the silence didn't feel normal. It felt like the calm before a storm. They crept downstairs, trying to be quiet, but the stairs groaned under their weight, the sound betraying them in the otherwise still house. They reached the bottom of the stairs and paused. From the kitchen, they could hear Clara's voice, muffled and distant, as if she were speaking to someone outside. The girls exchanged a quick glance, silently agreeing to move forward. They stepped into the kitchen, the tension between them almost unbearable. There, at the stove, Clara stood with her back to them, humming softly to herself as she stirred a pot of something. The warm scent of food filled the air, but neither girl noticed. Their focus was entirely on her, and the unease that simmered in the pit of their stomachs. Clara turned at the sound of the door creaking open, a smile on her face. "Well, good morning, girls," she said, her voice smooth, practiced. "Sleep well?" Neither of them answered immediately. Instead, Lily took a step forward, her gaze steady, her voice steady but edged with something new, something that had been born in the night. "We need to talk, Clara." Clara's smile faltered, just for a second, before it returned, cold and calculated. "Talk?" she asked, her voice laced with forced sweetness. "About what?" Lily stepped closer, Ruth following silently behind her, their eyes never leaving Clara. "We know what you're planning," Lily said, her voice quiet but firm. "You can't hide it anymore." Clara's eyes flickered, just for a moment, but it was enough. The mask was slipping. She set the spoon down slowly, her movements deliberate, as if weighing her next words carefully. "You girls are being awfully dramatic," she said softly, her tone cool, almost amused. "What exactly is it that you think you know?" Ruth spoke then, her voice tight with anger. "We heard you, Clara. We heard you last night." She took a step forward, her fists clenched at her sides. "What kind of deal are you making? What are you planning to do with us?" Clara's face hardened. The smile disappeared completely, replaced with something colder, something darker. For a moment, she didn't speak. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, she turned her back on them, walking toward the small table by the window. She picked up a small box and opened it slowly, her back to them as if dismissing them altogether. "You don't understand," Clara said, her voice low, almost to herself. "You never have." Lily and Ruth exchanged another glance, but neither said anything. They were waiting, listening, watching. "I did what I had to," Clara continued, still not facing them. "And now, there's nothing left to do but finish it. What's done is done. What's done is done." Ruth's voice cracked, disbelief lacing her words. "You're going to sell us, aren't you?" Clara turned then, her face unreadable. "I'm doing what's best for all of us," she said. "You don't know the whole story. You don't know the sacrifices I've made." Lily's heart pounded in her chest. She stepped forward again, her eyes locking with Clara's. "We're not your property, Clara. We're not some deal you can make to fix your problems. We're not your pawn." Clara's lips tightened, her eyes flashing with something darker, more dangerous. For a moment, the silence stretched out between them, heavy and thick. Then, slowly, Clara spoke, her words cutting through the tension like a knife. "If you think you can stop this, you're wrong," she said quietly. "You'll never be free of this. It's too late for that." Lily and Ruth stood still, the weight of Clara's words sinking in. The power had shifted, and they were no longer the helpless girls they had been yesterday. They knew what they had to do. The pieces were falling into place. But there was no turning back now. The sound of Clara's voice was like a knife in the stillness. Lily stood frozen in the doorway of the kitchen, Ruth beside her, both of them tense and holding their breath. The house, which had always felt like a home, now seemed like a cage, empty and suffocating. They hadn't been prepared for what was to come, but standing there, hearing Clara's words, they knew they couldn't go back to being the girls they had been. The truth had slipped through their fingers, and now it was up to them to hold it. Clara was at the stove, her back turned to them. She was stirring something in a pot, her movements slow and deliberate, as if everything were perfectly normal. The light of the morning shone through the window, casting shadows across her face, but she was unaffected by the quiet tension building in the room. The silence stretched between them like a long, drawn-out breath, before Lily finally spoke, her voice tight. "We need to talk." Clara didn't turn around. The only sign she had heard was the slight stiffening of her shoulders, the faintest hesitation in the rhythm of her stirring. Lily's words were bold, but her heart was racing. She had never confronted Clara like this before. It felt like stepping into the unknown, and yet it was the only path forward. Ruth stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "We know what you're planning." Still, Clara didn't respond. But now, the air around them had shifted. The tension that had been thick in the silence grew heavier, like a storm gathering on the horizon. Lily took a step forward, her voice a little stronger this time. "You can't keep hiding this, Clara. We heard you last night. We know you're making deals. You're planning to sell us." The words hung in the air like smoke, and the room suddenly felt smaller, darker. Clara's movements stilled. Her back was still to them, but the tension was palpable. The stirring of the pot stopped. The air was thick with anticipation. For a long moment, Clara didn't speak, as though the words she was about to say were too dangerous to utter. But then, slowly, she turned around, her face unreadable, but her eyes hard. Cold. "You don't understand," she said, her voice low, calm, almost too calm. "You never have." Ruth's expression faltered for just a second. "Understand what?" she asked, her voice strained with the weight of disbelief. "What could possibly justify this?" Clara's lips curled into a small, thin smile, but there was nothing warm in it. "I've done what was necessary," she said, her eyes narrowing. "I've kept this family together. But not all of you are meant to stay here." The words fell from her lips like stones, heavy and final. Lily's heart raced in her chest. She couldn't breathe. She wanted to yell, to scream, but she held herself back. She couldn't afford to show weakness now. "We're not your property, Clara. You can't just sell us." "We're not." "You are," Clara interrupted, her voice sharp and cutting. She stepped toward them now, her presence looming over them like a storm. "You don't know the sacrifices I've made. You don't understand what it takes to keep things in balance. This land, this house, it doesn't run on kindness. It runs on power, on control." She paused, her eyes locking with Lily's. "I did what had to be done, and now you will play your part." Lily's breath caught in her throat. The rage that had been building inside her was threatening to break free. She stepped forward, closer to Clara. "We're not your tools," she said, her voice steady, despite the fear clawing at her. "We're not some transaction. You think you have control over us, but you don't. Not anymore." Clara didn't flinch. Instead, her expression hardened, and she took a step closer to Lily. The air seemed to crackle between them, and Ruth instinctively stepped forward, positioning herself next to Lily. She didn't speak, but her presence was enough. The twins stood united now, shoulders squared, faces resolute. "You're making a mistake," Clara said, her voice colder now, as if the warmth of the room had suddenly disappeared. "A dangerous mistake." She turned away from them, her eyes still burning with something dark, something that had been brewing for far too long. "You don't know what's coming." Lily felt the weight of Clara's words pressing down on her. Her stomach twisted, but she didn't back down. "We'll find a way to stop it," she said, her voice low and filled with quiet determination. Clara's gaze flicked back to them, and for a moment, Lily could almost see the mask crack. It was brief, but it was there, the flicker of something close to fear. But it was gone just as quickly, replaced by that same cold, calculating look. She turned back to the stove, her movements smooth once more. "It's too late for that," she said softly, almost as if she were speaking to herself. "There's nothing you can do to stop what's already in motion." Ruth's fist clenched at her side, her jaw tight. "We'll see about that." Lily turned to her sister, their eyes meeting in that brief moment of shared understanding. Clara wasn't invincible. They didn't know what she was planning, but they knew one thing for sure: they weren't going to let her destroy them. Not without a fight. Clara didn't turn around as they left the kitchen, her back still to them. But as the door closed behind them, the weight of her words hung heavy in the air. "Too late," she had said. But for the twins, it wasn't too late. It was just the beginning. The attic was quieter than the rest of the house, a place forgotten by time and memories. Dust clung to every surface, and the air felt thicker up here, like the walls were holding on to secrets they didn't want to let go of. Ruth stood near the small window, her back to the light that filtered through the cracked glass, her face tense with concentration. She had found the letter hidden beneath the old quilts and the stack of forgotten linens. She could feel the weight of it even before she opened the envelope. Lily was seated on the floor, her legs crossed, staring at the old, leather-bound books that lined the shelves. She barely registered the creaking of the floorboards as Ruth walked over to her, the envelope in her hands. Ruth didn't say anything at first. She simply stood there, holding it like a relic, her eyes scanning the letter. Lily looked up, her face drawn, as if the very weight of the silence was enough to speak volumes. "What is it?" she asked quietly, though her voice was thick with anticipation. Ruth's hand trembled slightly as she unfolded the letter, her eyes narrowing as she read the words. "It's from Mother," she said, her voice strained. "To Clara." Lily's heart skipped a beat. "What does it say?" Ruth didn't answer right away. She was too busy reading, her eyes scanning the ink for answers, her breath catching as she took in the words. The room seemed to grow colder as she read, the space between them and the past stretching out. "It's threatening," Ruth whispered, her voice almost breaking. She let the letter fall to the floor as she sank down beside Lily. "It's a warning. She was afraid of Clara." Lily's stomach dropped. "Afraid of Clara? Why?" Ruth picked up the letter again, her eyes searching the text. "This letter, it's not just a warning. It's an ultimatum. Clara was part of the old family, the one Mother never talked about. The one she left behind." Lily blinked, confusion clouding her thoughts. "What do you mean, part of the old family? I thought Clara was just some woman who came to take Mother's place." "She wasn't." "She wasn't just that," Ruth interrupted, her voice tight with emotion. "Clara is connected to something darker, something we don't understand. I think she's been here, manipulating us, for much longer than we ever knew." She looked at Lily, her eyes wide with shock. "She's tied to our family's past, to the land, to everything. This isn't just some mistake. She's been playing a much bigger game." Lily felt a chill spread across her skin, the weight of Ruth's words settling deep in her chest. "What does she want from us?" Ruth's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "She wants control. She wants what our family has, what they lost. This isn't about us, Lily. We're just pawns in her plan." Lily could feel her heart racing as the full scope of what they were dealing with began to sink in. "What do we do? We can't just sit here." Ruth stood up, her body rigid with anger and fear. "We fight. We find a way to stop her." The room seemed to close in around them as Ruth's words rang out, sharp and clear. It was clear now, at least to Ruth, this wasn't just about surviving Clara's cold indifference. It was about breaking free from something far deeper, something that stretched back generations. Lily stood up too, her fists clenched at her sides. The weight of everything they had just learned was heavy, but the determination that now simmered beneath it felt stronger. "We won't let her take us," she said, her voice steady, though the terror was still there beneath the surface. Ruth nodded, her eyes hardening. "No. We're not just going to let her get away with this." They stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of their decision hanging over them like a cloud. The air in the attic was thick, the smell of old wood and dust mixing with the sense of dread that hung between them. "We need to know everything," Lily said quietly, her voice unwavering. "Where did she come from? What did she want with us?" Ruth shook her head. "I don't know, but we'll find out." Without another word, Ruth grabbed the letter from the floor and stuffed it back into the envelope. "We have to go back to where it all started," she said. "We need to confront her face to face." Lily followed her to the attic door, her mind whirling with the realization that their world was even more broken than they thought. Clara wasn't just a cold stepmother. She wasn't just an outsider. She was a force of power that had been lurking in the shadows for years, and now the twins were the ones who would have to fight to take it back. "I don't know if we're ready for this," Lily murmured as they made their way downstairs, the weight of the past pressing on them with every step. Ruth stopped at the bottom of the stairs, turning to face her sister. "It doesn't matter if we're ready. We don't have a choice." Lily swallowed hard, her hand gripping the railing for support. She had never felt this way before, so small, so helpless, yet at the same time, there was something else rising inside of her. Anger, maybe. or determination. It didn't matter. All that mattered now was that they were going to fight, and nothing would stop them. The house was quiet again, the silence stretching out like a threat. They had no idea what they were up against, but there was no turning back now. They were already in too deep. And the fight for their lives, for their future, had just begun.